Hello, my name is Robert Royal, and I'm the editor-in-chief of The Catholic Thing, and this is a Catholic Thing podcast. I'm really very, very happy today. I'm in Rome, where this is the first full week of the Synod on Synodality, the second October session of the Synod on Synodality. And I'm very delighted that although he's not here in Rome with me this time, we have Father Gerald Murray on the program with us today. Father Murray, I think, probably doesn't need any introduction to the people who follow the Catholic thing, but he's a priest of the Archdiocese of New York, a pastor of a parish. He's my longtime sidekick on the Papal Posse on EWTN, and I hope I can also say a longtime friend as well. So, Father, it's great to see your shining face as usual. So good to have you.
Well, thank you, Bob. And yes, I have to say, media work with you is a pleasure, and it really is a long friendship we have now.
Well, listen, we're right at the beginning, and a lot of people are pressing me and other people to say, well, what's happening about women and deaconesses and gays and bishops and lay people and all that sort of stuff. And I think I want to save some of those questions. We will probably touch on them today, but I think I'd like to save some of those questions of those hot button issues for later. And I really want to get your take, because you've been around a long time. You studied here in Rome. You've been watching these things. You're a canon lawyer. And I'd like to just kind of get into giving people a sense of what it's like at this point. We're not very far yet into the process. This is a month-long process. So let me just start out with the broadest of questions. What's your sense so far? This started late last week. There was a penitential session. There was a mass. And so we're just a couple of sessions into this. What do you kind of sense is happening so far?
Well, I think this is a different kind of synod than the one last year, because this synod is overshadowed by the expert study groups who issued their reports to the synodal body. But unlike the synodal body, they'll still be around come November. The synodal body will end its deliberations, I think it's October 26th or 27th. Mm-hmm. And then, unless the Pope re-extends again the length of the synod on synodality, the experts will be around, and they will issue their reports probably by June of next year. So the final word on the synod is not in the hands of the synod members. They will issue a final document, but they are aware that what they say will then become further study matter for the groups. And I noticed, for instance, in one of the American Magazine articles about what happened last week, they were called the secret study groups, even though they had published the names of the participants in the groups. They had not really involved the synodal members in their deliberations. And Cardinal Grech then issued a letter last week stating that everyone's welcome to send contributions to the study groups through the
not monetary opinion
so,
contributions. Let's make that clear.
Yeah. So exactly. So the contributions are to kind of shape the discussion, but that's like an outsider looking in. The study groups are where the action really is now, from the point of view of the final written product of the synodal deliberations. But
well, since you brought
I'd like to hear your opinion on this.
Let me ask you about this, because one of the things that is kind of puzzling, I think, to a lot of people is initially, let me just go through this because maybe some of our listeners or some of our watchers are not familiar with this. Initially, the synod was supposed to be last October 2023. And at a certain point, the Holy Father decided that there would be a second session. So we're now in 2024, which is why I'm in Rome. And then before this even started, he announced these study groups. He decided to take those so-called hot button issues off the table so that they would not be debated within the Synod Hall, where there are almost 400 people, conversing around round tables and whatnot. So we went from one session to two sessions, and now to two sessions plus these 10 study groups, which are slated to report back to the Pope at the end of June 2025, which is next year. So I want to put a question to you that I put to myself now and then: is why do you think the Holy Father has done this? Why is he? It's clear that he keeps extending And in some sense, you could almost say that he doesn't want yet to get to any decision point. At least it seems that way to me, because we went from one to two, now to three different elements in this process right now. But I'm just curious your thoughts about this.
Hmm. Well, it's interesting because we've heard throughout the last basically 2.5 years, the Synod is a process. So it should be looked at not simply as an event with a terminus. It's a process. Now, that always makes me nervous because processes involve constant change and things, developing over time. But when people want answers, they don't want to be told the process is underway. That's sort of like the inevitable bureaucratic answer. We've received your complaint. We will get to it eventually. But in terms of the Synod, uh, it's a little bit mysterious why the Pope did it. I think his experience at the first Synod on the Family showed him that if you want to produce a kind of a unanimous result, you have to stage manage it very carefully. And you really can't stage manage a one-time assembly. You can try, but you never know what's going to happen on the floor. And indeed, there was resistance to some of the more radical ideas that were discussed a year ago. They made a kind of couched appearance in the interim report that was issued. But now, once you take this hot button topics out of the study group, the Synod, I wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal which said the Synod is now a focus group. They're there to hear what the experts say. So I think this is a case of papal control over what's supposed to be a consultative process in which the Pope is going to hear from the people of God. Now the people of God are going to hear from the experts, and therefore they'll be easier to control the final result.
Yeah, yeah. I noticed, I read through the reports. There were some brief reports that these 10 study groups put out. They're just 3 pages, and they were meant to be short and to kind of tell the participants in the actual Synod this month about what they're thinking and where they're going. And one of the most sensitive ones, which is group 9, deals with questions, especially controverted questions of theology, morals, etc. Those so-called hot button issues that we all hear about. And I noticed in the conclusion of their 3-page report, this may sound a little like inside baseball, but in fact, I think this is quite important. They said, we're going to take as our paradigm Acts 15, which is the point at which the apostles decide that, look, we're not going to require people to be circumcised to become Christians. So they don't have to become Jews first. So in other words, they say that our paradigm is particularly this you could call it liberalization or leaving behind some things in the past that they say were no longer efficacious. Now, in and of itself, that's a report on what actually happened in the scriptures. We read that in the Acts of the Apostles. There were disagreements between Paul and some of the other apostles. But it seems to me that setting that up as a paradigm is sort of saying in advance, because they say that these things were no longer efficacious. They're almost kind of, as we've talked about many times in many different venues, they're almost saying that what the church has been teaching up until now is somehow an obstacle. It's no longer efficacious. And they even go on specifically to say that God's universal will that everyone be saved cannot be blocked by these things that seem to put obstacles in people's way. So if you're looking for what kind of framework that they're establishing in that very sensitive study group, they're kind of saying that the church teaching is an obstacle to people coming to God. Now, it may be psychologically and socially and whatnot, but I don't know if you looked at that, but I found it very strange.
No, I did look at that, Bob, and I'll just quote it. It's a few lines because the wording is so important. Remember, I'm a canon lawyer. I want to get down to the precise wording here.
Black
And it says
letter
the
law.
following: the absolute, yeah, there you go. The absolute precedence of God's universal salvific will and the prohibition of hindering God's universal salvific will with anything that no longer has any efficacious meaning. So my question is, any efficacious meaning according to whom? Remember that when the apostles discarded circumcision, it was because the old law has passed, the new law has come. The new covenant no longer involves the external sign of circumcision. It now, membership in the covenant of the new people is through baptism, which is an efficacious sign which produces the result of making people into members of the people of God. So it also says, in light of the eschatological revelation that took place in Jesus, the church created its tradition and the decision not to impose the practice of circumcision. That's not the best statement that I would put about how tradition came to us. Tradition and scripture and tradition together, according to Vatican II, are the dual font or source of revelation. So tradition is not simply that the church decided on certain things. It's that God revealed through the church that certain things are no longer applicable. So the old worship, the laws, the holiness laws of the Old Testament, all of that was cast aside because of, in Christ, we are a new creation, and the new creation involves different laws for ritual and the like. So yeah, paradigm shift again. I'm thinking back to what something George Weigel said a couple of years ago about the church. We don't do paradigm shifts.
Yeah.
We're not the
good
Republican administration kicking out the Democrats or vice versa.
Right.
Tradition and revelation undergo a process of a deepening and understanding, but we don't put aside the past in order to arrive at something that contradicts it.
Yeah, particularly things like no divorce, which also went against the Jewish law at the time of Jesus, and some other things that we could name right now. Let me move on a bit, though, because I like to keep these podcasts short for the Catholic thing. We'll have some chances to come back to this on other occasions, I'm sure. One of the things that I've been hearing here from various sources is that the Africans in particular have arrived this year and have decided they're not going to be talked to like children, if I can put it a little bluntly. That they sensed last year, and they pushed back last year on some of this stuff that was being proposed. But I think they arrived this year already prepared that they were going to have to do some battle against some of the progressive forces in the church, which they just find to be not only unfaithful to the tradition, but also a stumbling block for them. Because as you and I have both heard from them in the past, Muslims, Pentecostals in Africa are just waiting for the church to go off on crazy modernist tangents, and then they'll move in and say, look, the Catholic Church is corrupt. We've got faith and morals. But I've heard that, and I'm also hearing from some sources that there are some among the Americans who are talking with the Africans and also of the Europeans and Australians and others they're trying to put together a bit of a coalition. Now, the Holy Father, I think, rightly has said people shouldn't be coming with agendas, trying to impose agendas. But when it comes to at least organizing people who can present a coherent vision, I think that's quite different than trying to impose something on people, but to kind of explicate what they think that the faith is about at this moment in history. I think that this is an interesting development. And so let me ask you to speculate on something that's impossible to answer, but I'm hopeful about this. Are you?
I'm very hopeful when I hear that because I guess we can say throughout the pontificate, there have been some voices of dissent to uphold tradition and scripture that are coming from Africa. And I think of Cardinal Sarah, Robert Sarah. I think of the Cardinal Ambongo from Kinshasa in Zaire, who objected to the blessing of same-sex couples. African Christians, and I have a lot of familiarity with them because I had a lot of African parishioners when I was the pastor of the French parish in New York, and there were a lot of West African, French-speaking Africans. They were well trained. They understand the difference between a self-created religion. They have so many of the Protestant sects there where a great leader stands up and says, I'm going to tell you what the Bible means. Listen to me. As opposed to Christianity as taught by the Catholic Church, they understand that this is something coming from God that's consistent. There's a witness to it. So I'm glad to hear that. And, it reminds me, of the founding fathers of the United States. They wanted to avoid factionalism. The idea was we have a republic and we have a unity of understanding, But factionalism is sort of a deprecatory way to speak about groups that want to promote a certain understanding. So if there are those that want to say, we don't need a paradigm shift, I'm glad they're getting together and saying what we need is a deepening of our understanding of Catholic teaching.
Yeah, Catholicity, as I keep saying, not just identity and diversity, but we need that universal element. We're getting near the end of our time, so let me just ask you one more question. Is there anything else? I mean, there's a lot of negativity by traditional Catholics about this whole process of synodality, because it just seems, as you started out by saying, it just seems to be open-ended, and we can understand that there ought to be a continuing conversation within the church by people who are faithful Catholics and want to understand one another and work together toward God's kingdom. But that negativity, I think, diverts us away from or maybe a little bit diverts us away from what there might be in terms of opportunities here. I've talked about the opportunity for Africans and others to get together and to reaffirm the faith, even in these difficult circumstances of postmodernism that we exist in the the developed world. Is there anything else that we ought to feel hopeful about? Because large-scale processes like this really are not controlled by anyone. At the end of the day, the Holy Father is going to decide what the report is going to be about these two sessions of the Synod. But at the same time, he unleashes really some conversations that could go in some very interesting ways. And maybe we will discover some things that simply are going to have to be robustly maintained in this set of circumstances where everything seems to be flowing away from us. We've talked about liquid modernity before. That's clearly sociologically where we're at. There are very few anchor points, and maybe more people will recognize those anchor points. But I don't know. You tell me if that makes any sense to you.
Yeah, no, you raised some great points here, and I always try to look at from the point of view of seeing divine providence at work. It's often only when the Catholic teaching is challenged vigorously that great defenders of it arise. And I'm thinking particularly of the Jesuits during the Counter-Reformation. So many great theologians that came forward and were key instruments in refuting Protestant errors, but also explicating the Catholic faith in a way that was very persuasive. And, we had a long period of post-Reformation, a counter-Reformation Catholicism, the spread of the faith. What's going to happen in our own era, it's hard to tell. Speculating is interesting, but not always accurate. I would say, though, that it's quite clear to me that Bible-based and reverential approach to faith is winning the day among the young, certainly winning the day in Africa. It's, we have to get back to an understanding that God's revelation is not merely a consultation. In other words, God didn't say, consider these for your interest. He said, here's what you need to do. And then, the attitude, and I'm inspired in this by Dietrich von Hildebrand, the fundamental category of reverence for God and his creation, and particularly for our fellow man, that has to be the focus here. And what I've seen, sad to say, in the last few years in the church is revelation is put as a footnote, and reverence is treated as suspect. That people who are reverential are treated as not interested in helping their fellow man. I think that's false. And look, as editor of the Catholic thing, you have so many contributors who contribute such a wide variety of witnesses to the fact that people thirst for revelation and reverence. So I think we're going in a good direction in that regard.
Good. Well, thank you for that. And we're going to have to stop it here. Let me just say again, thank you to my dear friend, Father Gerald Murray from New York, and I'm Robert Royal in Rome. Since you brought up the Catholic thing, Father, let me just say to those of you not familiar with the Catholic thing, that the Catholic thing is a daily column series, so it's only 1,000 words. You don't have to read a long article. We deliberately keep it concise like that because we know that everybody has a lot of things to read and a lot of other demands on their time. So you can go to the Catholic Thing, www.thecatholicthing.org. You can subscribe for free, and you just will get into your email box every morning at 6 a.m. East Coast time in the United States that one day's column with also some news and some other commentary and some notables. And Father Murray writes there, I write there, and we have a wonderful slate of writers. So I can't recommend them and the Catholic Thing to you enough. Father, thank you. Thank you all who are listening or watching. And we'll be back soon to touch on some other things. We've got a whole month of the Synod ahead of us, and many, many other topics that we'll be delving into. So long.